I can't tell you how pleased and excited I am to be able to stand on this stage at this point in time and see the masses of people out here. Committee's worked so hard all year long to make sure that we have a good product for you and an outstanding opportunity for you to come in and break bread with our special speaker today, Professor Michelle Alexander. One of the other reasons I'm so excited is just look around the room. Look at the large numbers of people. And if you don't know the history of these luncheons, you can talk to Phil Ginsburg or Judge Johnson, and they will share with you that the very first luncheon that we had, they had maybe 50 people show up. So that would mean about these 4 tables showed up for the luncheon. That had nothing to do with the dedication to hard work, but it just shows you that how this program has grown over the years. We've been in a church and we outgrew that church. We come to a large hotel. I'm not sure if Safeco Field or the other facilities will accommodate us next year. But this is indeed a record number of years. A record number of years for a lot of reasons. A record number of judges are in this court from all levels of the bench. We have a record number of sponsors at this event. We have record attendance at this event. So we have so many different reasons to celebrate. We've got defenders, we've got all the prosecutors from all the agencies here. So it's clearly the professor's message is going to be carried across this community and across this city. And I don't want to just leapfrog over the fact that we have sponsors that have supported this organization, because without the sponsorship effort, we couldn't support and provide what we have for you today. So I'd like to not read you the list of sponsors, as the sponsors' names are going to be shown on the screen behind me, and they're also in your programs. But what I would like to take advantage of is to start by going through the different levels of sponsorship, and once I call your level, if you'd stand up. So if all the bronze sponsors, if you at your tables, would you please stand up and rise? All right, well, thank you. Those that are silver sponsors, would you please stand and rise? Thank you for your support. Our gold sponsors, would you please rise? And a brand new category this year, our platinum sponsors, would you please rise? Just so we don't let the cat out of the bag, next year we're going to have another level called the titanium level, so get ready for that one. But again, we couldn't have this program without all the support, so again, thank you. Another special thank you to the person sitting to my right at my table, and that's Dean Testy, University of Washington Law School. Thank you for your support. Please stand and rise. And thank you for having our guest speaker have a little bit of time with the students at the law school. I'm sure that they were deeply impressed by what they experienced. On Tuesday, we celebrate Dr. King's birthday. And every year, if you've come to this program that I've been on the stage, you hear the exact same message from me, and that is, what are you going to do this special this weekend other than watching a football game, some reruns or some movies, or just enjoying yourself? And those things are all fine because it is a holiday. But what are you going to do to celebrate Dr. King's legacy? And that means by giving, treating this as a day for education, and treating it as a day for service. Now think of it, the message that you will hear today from Professor Alexander, if you don't do anything else this weekend, if you'd at least educate others about the message that you hear from today, you'll have done your duty. And our president has also asked for a day of service this weekend. Figure out some way that you can fulfill that request as well. So with that, I'm going to sit down for a few minutes, and I'm going to introduce and invite to the stage at this point in time a very dear friend and co-chair extraordinaire, Karen Murray. Karen?
Good afternoon. My name is Karen Murray, and once again, I have the extreme privilege of co-chairing this luncheon and of introducing all the players who have made this today's event happen. As I call your names, please stand and be recognized. First, from the King County Bar Association, Executive Director Andrew Perdue. Denise Medlock and the KCBA staff. They really deserve your applause. And of course, without the committee itself, this event really would not be what it is. So as I call your name, please stand up. Eddie Aubrey, Stephanie Cox, Bonnie Glenn, Justo Gonzalez, Heather Hamamoto, Carrie Keefe, James Lupson. I believe Gregory Miller could not make it, but he should be added to that list and also be recognized. Kevin Peck, Burns Peterson, Superior Court Judge Catherine Schaefer, Leanne Wigley, Paula V. Wahai. Please give them an applause. Last but not least, a very special thank you to Philip Ginsburg and retired Superior Court Judge Charles V. Johnson. In fact, would you two please come and join me? And I would ask that Judge Jones also come up back to the podium so that we can publicly acknowledge you both for all your years of dedication to this program and for your many years of active participation on this committee. As they make their way to the podium, I would like to say that this public recognition is long overdue. But out of respect for these two individuals who shy away from public accolades, we have honored their unspoken wishes for a very long time. But sometimes modesty must be overruled and set aside, and a public recognition and appreciation must be displayed. So in that vein, I would like to first, if you would come forward, Philip, I would like to present to you this award that says Philip H. Ginsburg, in appreciation and recognition for all that you have given and continue to give in ensuring that Dr. King's true legacy is annually honored because of your leadership, your passion, and your steadfast commitment in pursuing justice for all. This is given to you on behalf of the committee on this day. Thank you.
Judge Johnson, as long as you know me, you know it's always a privilege and honor to pass on honors and accolades to you. On behalf of the King County Bar Association, this is presented to the Honorable Charles V. Johnson, in appreciation and recognition for your many years of leadership and annually honoring Dr. King's legacy because of your lifetime commitment in seeking justice for all. King County Bar Association, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Celebration Committee, January 18, 2013. Congratulations to both of you.
Sometimes events and circumstances have a way of determining the destination of an individual's future and that of a nation. Such was the case on December 1st, 1955, in Montgomery, Alabama, when Rosa Parks made the decision not to give up her bus seat to a white passenger, even though she knew she was violating the Jim Crow laws which ruled at the time. Because of her one action, the Montgomery Bus Boycott was formed, and a young minister by the name of Martin Luther King Jr., all of 26 years old, would be called upon because of his galvanizing voice to lead them. For 381 days, Black people of Montgomery made the choice not to use public transit because they believed that whatever sacrifices they had to make would be worth it to be treated as human beings and not as commodities. Eventually, with King leading them and inspiring them with his words, they found victory. The Supreme Court ruled that the laws segregating Montgomery buses were unconstitutional. When King agreed to lead the Montgomery bus boycott, he knew the movement would be met with much anger, hatred, and violence. So he made clear his mandate that his followers not use violence at any cost, even if he or his fellow protesters were being physically harmed or even worse, killed. Violence, King said, only added darkness to a night already devoid of stars. At the age of 39, King, who believed in the teachings of Mahatma Gandhi that nonviolence was the path to social reform, would die as he had not lived, violently by an assassin's bullet on April 4th, 1968. As we honor Dr. King, let us remember his legacy of nonviolence to create social change to benefit all humankind, regardless of race, national origin, economics, or religious affiliation, and to take time to remember those who gave their lives and made sacrifices so that we can enjoy the freedoms we have today. Martin Luther King would want us to pause to remember the Pakistani schoolgirls who dared to pursue an education despite the dangers, and the 20 children and 6 adults who died in the shooting tragedy in Newtown, Connecticut, and how that town is coming together in spite of its tears to fight the insanity of assault weapons so that others may find future peace. And remember the hundreds of Black young men who have also fallen prey to gun violence and unconscionable incarceration rates because of a society that has lost hope in their possibilities. King then might say, this day is not just about me, because the movement was never about one person. It was and continues to be about all of us. For the hour we are together, let us remember how Martin Luther King Jr. inspired us all by his insightful words and by his actions. That regardless of our differences, we are all equal, and we all can become whatever we dream when given the opportunity. Without further delay, let's begin the celebration Reverend King always loved a good party. So let's join Miss Sherry Adams in the Graham Hill Choir. As they are coming up, would you please turn to our Black National Anthem, Lift Every Voice. I would please ask all of you to stand as they begin singing Lift Every Voice. Thank you. It is my pleasure to introduce to you our next speaker. Please be seated. I'm so sorry, but I kind of liked it. It is my pleasure to introduce to you our next speaker. Richard Mitchell is currently a shareholder at Graham & Dunn. Prior to this position, he was general counsel to Governor Christine Gregoire and a member of the Summit Law Group. Please welcome the president of the King County Bar Association, Mr. Richard Mitchell.
Welcome, everyone. On behalf of the King County Bar Association, its Board of Trustees, staff, section, committees, and the many volunteers that help us produce our programs, welcome to KCBA's MLK Luncheon. Please join me again in thanking the Luncheon Committee, the co-chairs, Judge Richard Jones, Karen Murray, the members of the committee, the children of the Graham Hill Choir, their teacher, LaRon Baker, and our keynote speaker, Michelle Alexander, who you will hear from shortly, in a warm round of applause for making the time we spend together a special one. Please join me. As you've heard today is not only a chance to remember Dr. King's legacy of social reform, a legacy that moved our nation out of the darkness of the Jim Crow era into the light of civil rights and voting rights. It's also a chance to reflect on how you and I, the beneficiaries of untold sacrifice, will live out Dr. King's message of equality, justice, and peace in our communities. So as I welcome you today, I ask you one simple question. What will you do when you go back to your office and home? What will you do after lunch today? Each time you read or say the words King County, I ask you to at least do this. remember that it took almost 20 years, from 1986 to 2005, to change our state's name from the namesake of someone who was a slave owner to Dr. King. In 1986, under Ronald Reagan's leadership, our nation signed into law the celebration of Dr. King's memory on the third Monday of January. And soon after the passage of that federal law, the leaders of our great county said, we need to do something. Our county is named after a slave owner, someone whose wealth, someone whose riches were earned on the backs of many. We changed the name. We changed the logo from the imperial crown to the likeness of Dr. King, and you can barely see it here in the green flag behind me. But we changed it with the leadership of many leaders and elected leaders and non-elected leaders, including Emmett Watson, former King County Council member Bruce Lang, former King County Council member Ron Sims, and the leadership of Council member Larry Gossett and our current chair of the King County Council. I know Larry is here today, and if Larry, if you could at least wave or stand up, I'd appreciate it. In 1986, and many years after, they and we refused to accept as our namesake William Rufus Devane King. He was a lawyer from Alabama. He was our nation's 13th vice president. He was a cotton plantation owner and a slave owner. With a stroke of a gubernatorial pen on April 19, 2005, a day I will not forget because I witnessed it, we rejected oppression. We rejected the exploitation of human beings. We said, we in this county believe in the dignity and self-worth of every individual. We said everyone is created equal. And above all, we said, we will live those ideals in Dr. Martin Luther King County, Junior County. So, as I welcome you and thank you for making today one of KCBA's best attended MLK luncheons, I ask you again, what will you do as members of our Bar Association in pursuit of justice, peace, and equality in this great county? Thank you. Back to Karen.
Dr. King loved music, and during the civil rights movement, songs played a crucial role. The freedom songs are playing a strong and vital role in our struggle, King once said. They give people new courage and a sense of unity. I think they keep alive a faith, a radiant hope in the future, particularly in our most trying times. For many protesters, songs became like a favorite blanket or trinket that provided comfort when they were challenged by the unthinkable as they marched many miles to protest injustices. So in that spirit, please welcome again the Graham Hill Choir.
There was a man named Martin Luther King who said, "Let freedom ring."
you. I don't know how many of you know how important young people were to the movement. Dr. King made it a point to always have young children as they marched, and there was a reason for that. So how fitting that we have the Graham Hill Choir. Our next presenter is LaRon Baker. Ms. Baker is a staff attorney at ACLU, a graduate of the University of Washington Law School, and a past recipient of the King County Bar Foundation Minority Law Student Scholarship. Please welcome Ms. LaRon Baker.
Good afternoon, everyone. As you know, my name is LaRon Baker, and I'm a staff attorney at the American Civil Liberties Union of Washington. Woo. I may be familiar to some of you, either because I know you, or because I spoke at the King County Bar Foundation's Breakfast of Champions a few years ago when I was a 3L at the University of Washington. Since the last time I stood before you, I graduated from the University of Washington School of Law, was speaker of my class, worked at McDonald Hogan Bayless, or clerked at McDonald Hogan Bayless for a year, passed the bar, and became a staff attorney at the ACLU, where I litigate trial and appellate levels, litigate at the trial and appellate levels, constitutional and civil rights matters, including free speech, police misconduct, and voting rights matters. The journey to get here was a long one. It was approximately 8 years ago that I first began to dream of being an attorney and an advocate for the rights of the marginalized, disenfranchised, and those in need of protection against arbitrary government action. But that dream did not seem like one that would grow to fruition because it was not planted on especially fertile ground. When I graduated from high school, and for a few years thereafter, my life was not one that anyone would have ever thought would lead to college or the professional track. I was effectively on my own since my junior year of high school, and it took me 2 shots at my senior year before I graduated. And it was many years after that before I went to college. I worked my way through undergrad as a legal secretary, or I guess now a legal assistant. And let me tell you, at that time, I had no intention of ever becoming an attorney. It did not seem very pleasant from the perspective of a legal secretary. And after graduating from undergrad, I served as a Literacy AmeriCorps member at the King County Jail just down the street here, where I taught GED classes to incarcerated individuals who were housed in medium and close custody. I taught basic education skills to individuals who had been written off as failures, as incorrigibles, and who were those that society had decided were unworthy of much time or attention and that schools had neglected. But it was there that I encountered individuals who would alter the course of my life. I met a few of the most brilliant individuals I've ever known in those classes, and that's saying a lot. And I met a student who told me about his case and how the Innocence Project Northwest clinic housed at UW Law was investigating his claim of innocence. Such a small conversation, a moment where he opened up and shared his life experience with me. And although he doesn't know it, that conversation changed the trajectory of my life. I began to research the Innocence Project and realized for the first time, which is kind of sad, that attorneys, law students, clerks, and legal volunteers can be effective advocates for social justice and for social change, and can be catalysts for change and assist in shifting society towards being more just and equitable. At that moment, a spark flared in me, and I began to dream of becoming an attorney. But it wasn't until I began to work with a young woman at the King County Juvenile Detention Facility through my work with Powerful Voices that spark fanned into a flame. I taught a girls' health and wellness class that focused on developing positive strategies for dealing with abusive relationships, addiction issues, and I also connected young women with service providers who could assist them in finding medical care and housing and getting counseling that they much needed. The young women I worked with, many of them who looked like me and reminded me of older versions of myself and my friends, were entrenched in the foster care system and the criminal justice system and many of our other systems that, although created to assist these young people, actually were failing them and were causing them to stay involved in these systems because the systems are flawed and are frequently biased in how they deal with individuals. In my time working with individuals living at the King County Correctional Facility and at juvenile detention, I began to understand how these systems that are meant to help unintentionally end up marginalizing and stigmatizing those same individuals and their communities and ultimately perpetuating the problems that they seek to eliminate. After witnessing this and through research into how attorneys utilize their knowledge and skills to advocate for a more just world, and meeting and talking to law students from Seattle University and the University of Washington, and attorneys from the Northwest Justice Project and Columbia Legal Services who presented monthly workshops to the young women at juvenile detention, I began to understand how much more effective an advocate for social change I could be with a law degree and litigation skills. And the desire to be a legal advocate became a full-fledged fire. I planned, I schemed, I took the LSAT, but because I don't have a family who could pay for my legal education or support me through law school, and because working at nonprofits hadn't really given me the opportunity to amass enough savings to pay for law school out of pocket, I had serious doubts about whether I would be able to go to law school. I knew I wanted to stay in Washington and to continue working on behalf of a community that I call home. But I also knew that I couldn't take on crippling loans, and I didn't relish the idea of working full-time while in school. So I applied to law schools across the country, crossed my fingers, and hoped that one would accept me and give me funding. I was prepared to move out of state, but I hoped that I could go to law school here in Seattle and eventually practice law here. It was 6 years ago, almost to the day, that I received the best Valentine's gift I think I'll ever get. I was accepted to UW Law and was awarded a scholarship package that made it possible for me to matriculate and to go to law school. I was ecstatic. In my time at UW Law, I was a student in the Innocence Project Clinic, Northwest Clinic, served as a board member of the Black Law Students Association, Minority Law Students Association, Street Youth Legal Advocates of Washington, National Lawyers Guild, and on an advisory committee to the Dean on Diversity. I also externed at Division II with Judge Armstrong. None of this would have been possible without the financial assistance I received because I would have had to juggle working impossible hours with studying impossible hours. A few days ago, I had dinner with a friend from law school, and she began to talk about the people who in her life, whom she has randomly encountered, who changed her entire world. Individuals who she didn't really know or didn't know at all, and who maybe thought that something good might come of what they said or might come of what their actions that they took, but whose actions and comments ended up fundamentally altering her life and sometimes changed the trajectory of what she envisioned to be her whole future. She asked me if I had similar stories of people who reached out for a moment and who might not have really thought too much about the ripple effect of what their comments or actions might have in my life. I paused for a second and I came up with some people who I had talked to and who encouraged me to continue to pursue my dreams and goals when I was a young person, and who told me that at a moment when I especially needed to hear it. And then I told her all about you. The the individuals who give to the King County Bar Foundation Scholarship Fund without knowing who their money is going to support. I would not be here before you, practicing attorney, without those of you who have continuously supported the King County Bar Foundation Scholarship Fund, and who, by doing so, gave me the opportunity to go to law school, focus on my studies, be an active participant in many organizations and clinics, and to become an attorney and advocate for the rights of others and a part of the King County legal community. And I thank you.
I'm always so impressed that individuals are willing to get up here and share their personal stories so that they can lend their voice to do an ask. There's a poster that I've noticed as I walk through the shopping mall, and it reads, "What can one person do?" And there's a photo that is next to it, and it's of Nelson Mandela. And when I see that, I think of all the other people. What can one person do? And I say much. However large of a donation or however small, it would mean so much, because it's like a ripple when you throw a stone and the water goes out. I hope that you will give to the Minority Scholarship Fund, because it will enhance what we're here for today. And that is for people to meet all their possibilities and to fulfill their dreams. The envelopes will be on your desk and on your tables, and if this is something you want to do, please do, so that other people like Miss LaRon Baker can meet all their possibilities. Thank you. And when I think of that slogan, I also think of the lady that I met today by the name of Professor Michelle Alexander. What can one person do? She's doing a lot. Thank you. Yeah, it's all yours.
I'm back. 2013 will represent 19 years as a judge for me. 13 years, not. I don't have to campaign anymore, so that's okay. But aside from that, 13 years as a King County Superior Court judge, and the balance of that time as a federal judge. And for just about every Friday of that 19 years, I perform the very toughest part of my job, and that's sentencing. And for most of those 19 years, those sentencings have involved some form and some level of individuals that I'm required and have to send to prison. And I can't tell you how many times that I've looked out across the bench, and every single person that walked into my courtroom was African American. Every single one that walked into that room wore a red jumpsuit, handcuffs, head bowed, as they sat waiting for their fate to be decided by myself. And I don't think my experience is unique or uncommon. And I'm quite sure if you were to ask the other judges in this room or the other judges that you know across the country, they'd agree that they've experienced the exact same thing. Large numbers of African-American men coming into their courtroom to be sentenced. Now, I've also visited prisons across not just this state, but in different places in the United States, and have had the personal experience of sitting in a large room and seeing large numbers of Hispanic men and black men coming into the room in large numbers with my own eyes, not something I read, not something someone told me about. I specifically recall going to a prison on the East Coast, and I just happened to be there when they were doing roll call, where they called back in everyone for a head count. And through every door, every access point, every person that walked in that room seemed like they were African American or Latino. I was so taken aback that I had to pull the warden aside and say, I don't understand what's going on. How come the numbers are so large of just blacks and Latinos in this jail, in this prison? And the only response that she could give was because of their request to be as near to family as possible. Now, as a black man, I can tell you that looking across the bench how extraordinarily difficult it is to have to sentence people from my neighborhood, the same block I grew up on, the same neighborhood, played the same playgrounds, did the same things I did when I was a kid, that are being sentenced and sent to prison. So what do we do with all this? Now, we can write op-ed pieces, we can have sidebar conferences, we can have little discussions about it, we can even talk about it this weekend in celebrating Dr. King's birthday. Well, many of us have just pondered about what to do. One person, the person with us today, has taken on the responsibility and taken on the crusade of dedicating her life to raising the issue of racial disparity in prisons like no other person in current times. And I first heard of this crusader many months ago by Tom Hilliard. Tom Hilliard's in the room. You can wave, Tommy, if you're sitting right back there. And Tommy and I were having a conversation about bringing speakers to different programs. And Tommy said, without question, you have to get Michelle Alexander. Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow. And then I started hearing other people talking about the Jim Crow, and not that I don't always follow what Tommy says in court. And he'd probably think never, but setting that aside. I read and I got the book that night, and I couldn't stop reading. When I finished the book, I looked at the book and I saw black hands on a jail cell. And it hit me, Jim Crow. That time period represents some of the ugliest times in the history of America. Systematized and many times judicially sanctioned racism. I was blown away by reading the book by Professor Alexander, the depth of her analysis and the sobering reality of her message, the modern era of Jim Crow. Now, our message is pretty simple, and she tells you straight up in the book, the very beginning. What this book is intended to do, the only thing it is intended to do, is to stimulate a much-needed conversation about the role of the criminal justice system in creating and perpetuating racial hierarchy in the United States. Now, you don't have to do much research and Google too many spots on your computer to find out that she's a unique individual, and she possesses the profound and unique ability to communicate and share her message with individuals of all levels, all forms of education. Now, I've talked to several folks over the many months since I read that book, and some folks will say, we know she does a lot of finger pointing in her book, directing traffic in terms of who might be responsible for the circumstance we find ourselves in. But the difference is, she takes that same finger and points it at herself, and has accepted responsibility when she bought into different aspects of the system as well. And the other major difference is, instead of talking about it, and that's it, she has dedicated herself to bringing change. She's been honored by numerous organizations across the United States and featured on national and public radio and TV shows, and has a lecture schedule that seems virtually impossible to accomplish. Her detailed resume is reflected in your program. I'm not going to take precious time away from her to give you that resume, but you're ordered by the court to read it. And she meets all the demands and still finds time to be an incredible mother to 3 young children. How blessed and how lucky they are. She's also been an inspiration to students across the country and she's also had the good fortune of serving on faculty and institutions as noted, and they've been extremely lucky. On Monday, we celebrate Dr. King's birthday. He lived and died fighting injustice and certainly would have been at the forefront of the issues Professor Alexander has raised. Dr. King believed in action by raising the conscience of the masses to the plight many perceived to be on the fringe. Dr. King once said, "To cure injustice, you must expose them before the light of human conscience and the bar of public opinion." If anyone in modern America is continuing the dream of Dr. King, addressing the injustice of what Professor Alexander has characterized as a comprehensive system of racialized social control, it is Professor Michelle Alexander. Would you please rise and give Professor Alexander an Emerald City warm welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that incredibly warm and generous introduction and for the very warm welcome. I am just thrilled to be here. I am delighted to join in this wonderful celebration of Reverend Martin Luther King Jr.'s life and his legacy. These types of gatherings are always important, but this year is truly unique. This year will mark the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington. 50 years have passed, 50 years since King's voice soared over the Washington monuments declaring his dream, "I have a dream," is as deeply rooted in the American dream. It's an extraordinary and very familiar speech. I've grown accustomed to hearing clips from that speech recycled over and over on the radio every January. There are the favorite quotes, the favorite clips that get repeated over and over again. And now that I have school-aged children, I see how King is explained to them in classrooms. When I was in elementary school, there was no Martin Luther King Day, no discussions of his heroism in classrooms, but just the other day, my children came home from school telling me all they had learned about King's courage. He was the man who stood up to bullies. He was the man who declared that all children of all colors and walks of life should be able to hold hands and be judged by the content of their character and not the color of their skin. He was willing to die so that all of us could live his dream. And I find myself conflicted as I listen to my children parrot back to me what they've heard in school about this man who believed in kindness and justice, fairness and compassion for all. And I tell them, yes, all of that is true. But I feel uneasy. I know that something has been lost in the translation. That sense of disorientation was crystallized for me recently when I read Vincent Harding's insightful book, Martin Luther King, The Inconvenient Hero. Dr. Harding was one of King's closest friends and advisors, marching with him countless times throughout the movement, and his family lived around the corner from Dr. King in Atlanta. Harding writes with some real sorrow, quote, "It appears as if the price for the first national holiday honoring a black man is the development of a massive case of national amnesia concerning who that black man really was. I would suggest that we Americans have chosen amnesia rather than continue King's painful, uncharted, and often disruptive struggle toward a more perfect union. It appears," he says, as if we are determined to hold our new hero captive to the powerful period of his life that culminated in the magnificent March on Washington in 1963, refusing to allow him to break out beyond the stunning eloquence of his I Have a Dream speech in 1963. Dr. Harding writes, quote, we would like to forget that it was not the weaver of gentle, sunny dreams of freedom who was shot down on a balcony in Memphis, Tennessee. He was, by 1968, a different, even more courageous man, a man ahead of his time. And I can see clearly now that on days like today, events like this that are held around the country, we rarely honor, truly honor, the man and the dream who died. No, we honor that sunny, cheery version of him. We honor the man who gave the soaring speech about black and white children holding hands, a man who dreamed an integrationist dream. But who was Dr. King 5 years later, in 1968? Who was the man who was killed on a motel balcony, the man who was marching with sanitation workers for economic justice, not mere civil rights, the man who had come to believe after the civil rights bills had been passed, after the civil rights victories had already been won, that our greatest battles, the most important struggles, still lie ahead, and that nothing short of a radical restructuring of our society held any hope for making the dream and promise of America a reality for all of its citizens. King explained to a reporter in 1967, quote, "For years I labored with the idea of reforming the existing institutions of the society, a little change here, a little change there. Now I feel quite differently. I think you've got to have a reconstruction of the entire society, a revolution of values." Frustrated by white resistance to addressing in any meaningful way decaying ghettos, failing schools, structural joblessness, crippling poverty, he told his staff at the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, quote, "The dispossessed of this nation, the poor, both white and Negro, live in a cruelly unjust society. They must organize a revolution against that injustice, not against the lives of their fellow citizens, but against the structures through which the society is refusing to lift the load of poverty." What would King think of us today, of the world we have created in his absence? Would he believe the nonviolent revolution he dreamed of had occurred or even begun, the revolution of values he prayed for? Would he, if he could see us today, believe that we now share his dream, that we are now traveling down the road that he was marching? 50 years later, have we caught up with King yet? Are we finally on the path that he was traveling in 1963, in 1968? Back in 1969, when blood still stained the motel balcony where Dr. King was murdered, a poem was written honoring his life and reflecting on his death. The poem was written back when King had only just begun the process of being transformed from, in our collective consciousness, from a troublesome, dangerous black figure to our new national hero. It was written way back when the memory of King's assassination was still fresh, the tears still spilling from those who loved him. Back then, in 1969, the poet Carl Wendell Hines Jr. penned this poem reflecting on King's death. He wrote, "Now that he is safely dead, let us praise him, build monuments to his glory, sing hosannas to his name. Dead men make such convenient heroes. They cannot rise to challenge the images we would fashion from their lives. And besides, it is easier to build monuments than to make a better world. So now that he is safely dead, we, with eased consciences, will teach our children that he was a great man, knowing that the cause for which he lived is still a cause, and the dream for which he died is still a dream, a dead man's dream." Now that he is safely dead. Is Martin Luther King Jr. safely dead? Is it true? Is it true that he and his dream are safely dead? I know that so many in this room would say, no, it's not true. His spirit is very much alive. It is still living among us. It is thriving right here in this room. And what better evidence could there be of that fact than we are all here today, right here now, celebrating his dream? A national federal holiday has been created. Think of that, a national federal holiday honoring a man that the FBI once designated as a threat to national security, a radical troublemaker. Isn't it obvious now that we as a nation have finally caught up to King? We may not be living his dream, but at least we share his dream. And what better evidence could there be than the fact that we elected our first black president twice? Something unimaginable in 1963 or 1968. Clearly, we must be living the dream, or at least sharing the dream, right? It has been said by numerous philosophers and theologians that any society, any civilization must be judged by how it treats its most vulnerable members and its prisoners. King, no doubt, would agree with that assessment. And in considering how we fare in that regard, I find myself thinking of people like Susan Burton, people who have cycled in and out of our nation's prison system in this era of mass incarceration, a time when our prison population has more than quintupled. This post-King, post-civil rights era, when our prison population has soared, quintupled, and overwhelmingly filled by poor people, people of color, who are now permanently locked up or locked out and stripped of the very civil and human rights that Dr. King and so many other civil rights activists risked their lives for, and some even died for. I think of Susan, whose son was killed by the police. A police cruiser barreling down her street in south central Los Angeles ran over her 5-year-old boy. She received no apology, no acknowledgement of her loss, and she fell into a deep, deep depression. Her grief was overwhelming, and she ultimately became addicted to crack cocaine. Now, if Susan had been wealthy, in fact, if she had even just been solidly middle class with a good job and a good health care plan, she would have been entitled to many, many hours of therapy. She would have been prescribed good legal drugs to help her cope with her grief and severe depression. But no, things were different for Susan. She became addicted to crack cocaine and thus began her odyssey, cycling in and out of the prison system for 15 years, never being offered drug treatment. No, only one plea bargain after another. Just take the deal. Take the 2 years rather than the 6. Take the 5 years rather than the 10. Just take the deal. Soon you'll be out of here. And every time she was pushed out, she found herself back on the street, branded a felon, a drug felon. Unable to find work, forced to check the box on every employment application, unable to be hired anywhere, unable to find housing, in and out of homeless shelters, and ultimately back into jail for committing crimes of survival, crimes related to drug addiction, in and out of jail for 15 years until finally, by the grace of God, she was granted access to a private drug treatment facility, got clean, and was given a job. And at that time, Susan decided she was going to dedicate the rest of her life to ensuring that no other woman would ever have to suffer what she went through. And she began by going down to Skid Row in Los Angeles and meeting women as they would get off the prison bus, being tossed out on the street. Cardboard box was all they had, a cardboard box carrying nothing but their few belongings, little or no money. And Susan would meet them, strangers to her, as they were getting off the bus, and she would say, "Come home with me. You can sleep on my couch. You can sleep on the floor. You can sleep on the floor in my kitchen. You can sleep anywhere. I'll give you a safe place. You don't have to turn to the streets tonight. I'll feed you. I'll help you reunify with your children. I am here for you." Susan now runs 5 safe homes for women in Los Angeles. She provides employment assistance, job counseling and training, assistance looking for housing. She reunifies families. And beyond that, she is organizing formerly incarcerated people throughout California to demand the restoration of their basic civil and human rights, recognizing that each and every one of us deserve a chance to work, to support ourselves, to have a roof over our heads, no matter who we are or what we may have done. Clearly, Susan has caught up to King. But what about the rest of us? Now, what I have to say on this point will not be popular. It is not the sunny, cheerful message that is expected on days like today, but I believe it to be the truth. And it implicates me, and it implicates everyone in this room, especially those of us in the legal profession, the supposed guardians of liberty and justice. The truth is this: we have allowed a human rights nightmare to occur on our watch. In the years since Dr. King's death, a vast new system of racial and social control has emerged from the ashes of slavery and Jim Crow. A system of mass incarceration that no doubt would have Dr. King turning in his grave today. The mass incarceration of poor people of color in the United States has emerged as a new caste-like system, one that shuttles young people from decrepit, underfunded schools to brand new, high-tech prisons. It's a system that locks poor people, overwhelmingly poor folks of color, into a permanent second-class status nearly as effectively as earlier systems of racial and social control once did. It is, in my view, the moral equivalent of Jim Crow. Now, I'm always eager to admit that there was a time when I rejected this kind of talk out of hand. There was a time when I rejected comparisons between mass incarceration and slavery, or mass incarceration and Jim Crow, believing that those kinds of claims and comparisons were exaggerations, were distortions. In fact, there was a time when I thought that people who made those kinds of claims and those kinds of comparisons were actually doing more harm than good to efforts to reform our criminal justice system and achieve greater racial equality in the United States. But what a difference a decade makes. For after years of working as a civil rights lawyer, an advocate, representing victims of racial profiling and police brutality, investigating patterns of drug law enforcement in poor communities of color, and attempting to assist people released from prison re-enter into a society that had never shown much use for them in the first place, I had a series of experiences that began what I call my awakening. I began to awaken to a racial reality that is just so obvious to me now that what seems odd in retrospect is I could have managed to be blind to it for so long. As I write in the introduction to my book, what has changed since the collapse of Jim Crow has less to do with the basic structure of our society than the language we use to justify it. In the era of colorblindness, it is no longer socially permissible to use race explicitly as a justification for discrimination, exclusion, and social contempt. So we don't. Rather than rely on race, we use our criminal justice system to label people of color criminals and then engage in all the practices that we supposedly left behind. Today, it is perfectly legal to discriminate against criminals in nearly all the ways in which it was once legal to discriminate against African Americans. Once you're labeled a felon, the old forms of discrimination, employment discrimination, housing discrimination, denial of the right to vote, exclusion from jury service, suddenly legal. As a criminal, you have scarcely more rights and arguably less respect than a black man living in Alabama at the height of Jim Crow. We have not ended racial caste in America, we have merely redesigned it. Now, I find that these days, when I tell people that I now believe that our system of mass incarceration is like a new Jim Crow, a new caste-like system, people typically react with this shocked disbelief. They say, how can you say that? How can you say that? Our criminal justice system isn't a system of racial control, it's a system of crime control. And if black people would just stop running around committing so many crimes, we wouldn't have to worry about being locked up and then stripped of their basic civil and human rights. But therein lies the greatest myth about mass incarceration, namely that it's been driven by crime and crime rates. It's just not true. Our prison system quintupled in the period of 30 years, quintupled. We went from a prison population of about 300,000 to one that's now over 2 million. In the space of 30 years, we quintupled our prison population, but in that same 30-year period of time, crime rates fluctuated. They went up, they went back down again, went back up, went back down again. And today, as bad as crime rates are in some parts of the country, today crime rates nationally are at historical lows. But incarceration rates, especially black incarceration rates, have consistently soared. Most criminologists and sociologists today will acknowledge that crime rates and incarceration rates in the United States have moved independently of one another. Incarceration rates, especially black incarceration rates, have soared regardless of whether crime is going up or going down in any given community or the nation as a whole. So what explains this? So what explains the birth of a penal system unprecedented in world history, not simply crime and crime rates? Well, the answer is the war on drugs and the Get Tough movement, the wave of punitiveness that washed over the United States. Drug convictions alone, just drug convictions, accounted for about 2/3 of the increase in the federal prison system and more than half of the increase in the state prison system between 1985 and 2000, the period of our prison system's most dramatic expansion. Drug convictions have increased more than 1,000% since the drug war began. I mean, to get a sense of how large a contribution the war on drugs has made to mass incarceration, consider this. There are more people in prisons and jails today just for drug offenses than were incarcerated for all reasons in 1980. Now, this has had a staggering impact on communities of color. Judges look at defendants before them one by one. Prosecutors and public defenders must deal with their cases one by one. But entire communities have been leveled by this war. In some major American cities today, more than half of working-age African-American men now have criminal records and are thus subject to legalized discrimination for the rest of their lives. In some cities like Baltimore, Chicago, Philadelphia, the numbers are far worse. In Chicago, for example, it was reported that if you take into account prisoners, if you actually count prisoners as people, and keep in mind that prisoners are excluded from poverty statistics and unemployment data, thus masking the severity of racial inequality in the United States. But if you actually count prisoners as people in the Chicago area, nearly 80% of working-age African-American men now have criminal records and are thus subject to legalized discrimination for the rest of their lives. These men are part of a growing undercaste, not class, caste, a group of people defined largely by race, relegated to a permanent second-class status by law. Now, the reality is that most Americans violate drug laws in their lifetime. Most do. No one here needs to raise their hand. Studies have consistently shown for decades that, contrary to popular belief, people of color are no more likely to use or sell illegal drugs than whites, or sell. Now, that defies our basic racial stereotypes about who drug dealers are. If you're like most Americans and you picture a drug dealer in your head, you most likely picture some black kid standing on the street corner with his pants sagging down. And plenty of drug dealing happens in the hood, but it happens everywhere else in America as well. In fact, where significant differences and the data can be found, it frequently suggests that white youth are more likely to engage in illegal drug dealing than black youth. But that's not what you would guess by taking a peek inside our nation's prisons and jails, which are overflowing with black and brown drug offenders. In some states, 80 to 90% of all drug offenders sent to prison have been one race, African American. Now, I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge here that in King County, the severe racial disparities in drug arrests have not gone unchallenged. In fact, King County is one of the few places where these issues are being raised vigorously by public defenders representing drug defendants. For the past 12 years, King County public defenders have effectively documented and challenged racial disparities in Seattle drug arrests, which have been among the most extreme in the entire country. And your local public defenders have worked with prosecutors and police to start LEAD, which is among the most promising efforts to reform drug policing in the country. That is the truth. Now, I understand that King County is considering ending the public defense program that's responsible for all of this work, which I have to say would be a tremendous loss. It is, yes. Yes. It is so rare, so very rare to have a public defense program that would take these kinds of issues on with such zeal and pure purpose and do so effectively and drive reforms that advance racial justice. So I hope you appreciate what you have here and do whatever it takes to save it. It is very, very easy to get public defense wrong. Very easy. And when you're lucky enough to have a good system, a great system like you do here in King County, don't take it for granted. Please defend it at all costs. Yes. The price of a failed public defender system is immeasurable. After all, once you've been branded a criminal or felon, you are trapped for life. People released from prison find themselves ushered into a parallel social universe in which the basic civil and human rights that the rest of us take for granted no longer apply to them. You may be stripped of voting rights for a period of years or the rest of your life, depending on what state you live in. Once branded a felon, you are deemed ineligible for jury service for the rest of your life. Discrimination against you in employment, now viewed perfectly legal and absolutely routine. For the rest of your life, you've got to check that box on employment applications asking the dreaded question, have you ever been convicted of a felony? Knowing full well the odds are sky high that application is going straight to the trash. People often say to me, oh, come on. You're making excuses for people. You're making excuses. People released from prison, it may be hard, but they can get a job somewhere. I mean, they could get a job at McDonald's or something. I say, well, no, actually, getting a job at McDonald's is no easy feat if you have a felony record. People say, well, maybe they could become entrepreneurs or start their own businesses. I say, well, most people coming out of prison don't have a lot of money to start their own small business, but even if they did, there are hundreds of laws denying professional licenses to people released from prison. In my state, in Ohio, you can't even get a license to be a barber if you've been convicted of a felony. Housing discrimination, perfectly legal. Public housing projects as well as private landlords free to discriminate against people with criminal records and routinely do. Even food stamps, public benefits may be off limits to you. Under federal law, you're not even entitled to food stamps for the rest of your life if you've been convicted of a drug felony. Fortunately, many states have now opted out of the federal ban on food stamps for people convicted of drug offenses, but there's still thousands of people who can't even get food stamps to feed themselves because they were once caught with drugs. What are people released from prison expected to do? Can't get a job, barred from housing, even food might be off limits to you. Well, apparently what we expect them to do is to pay hundreds or thousands of dollars in fees, fines, court costs, accumulated back child support, which continues to accrue while you're in prison, And in a growing number of states, you're actually expected to pay back the costs of your imprisonment. And paying back these fees, fines, and court costs might be a condition of your probation or your parole. And then if you're one of the lucky few, the very few who manages to get a job right out of prison, up to 100% of your wages can be garnished. 100%. To pay back all those fees, fines, court costs, accumulated back child support. What do we expect folks to do? Say, when you step back and take a look at it as a whole, what does the system seem designed to do? It seems designed to send folks right back to prison, which is what in fact happens the vast majority of the time. About 70% of people released from prison return within 3 years, and the majority of those who return in some states do so in a matter of months, because the challenges associated with mere survival on the outside are so immense. Why have we chosen this path? Why have we chosen to recreate a vast new racial undercast in America? Now, I know I'm running out of time here, so I'm not able to describe all of the politics, racial politics, that gave rise to the drug war and the Get Tough movement, or the myriad ways in which politicians of both political parties have exploited our nation's racial divisions and anxieties for political gain with Get Tough slogans and rhetoric. And I don't have time here in this forum to describe the seismic shifts that have occurred in the American economy as we've shifted from an agrarian economy to an industrial economy to now a service-based economy, and how those changes have rendered black men in particular so vulnerable, no longer necessary to the functioning of the US economy, no longer needed to pick cotton in the fields or labor in factories. Black men have found themselves suddenly disposable, no longer necessary to the functioning of the US economy. But what I do know, and what I can say, is that in the years following Dr. King's death, our nation was faced with a choice, a fork in the road. We could continue down the road Dr. King was traveling. We could choose the path of compassion, forgiveness, inclusion, and hope. Or we could choose a different road, a road more familiar when it comes to matters of race, the road of exclusion, division, punitiveness, and despair. One day, I believe historians will look back on the age of mass incarceration, and they will say it was there, right there at the prison gates, that we abandoned Dr. King's dream. When we took a dramatic U-turn, where we veered off the trail he had blazed. We took a tragic U-turn that would result in millions of people locked up and permanently locked out. We have now spent $1 trillion waging the drug war since it began, $1 trillion. Funds that could have been used for education, for job creation in the communities that needed it most, funds that could have been used for drug treatment, funds that could have been used for our collective well-being. Instead, those dollars have been used for the destruction of countless lives, families, and dreams. So what do we do? Where do we go from here? Well, my own view is that nothing short of a major awakening, a new movement, has any hope of re-inspiring a commitment to Dr. King, the kind of commitment to his dream that would end mass incarceration in America. And if you doubt that such a movement is truly necessary in America today, surely something less would do. Consider this. If we were to return to the rates of incarceration we had in the 1970s or the early 1980s, before the war on drugs and the Get Tough movement truly kicked off, we would have to release 4 out of 5 people who are in prison today. 4 out of 5. More than 1 million people employed by the criminal justice system, including many people in this room, might lose their jobs. Most new prison construction has occurred in predominantly white rural communities, communities that have often been sold on prisons as an answer to their economic woes, communities that now believe that prisons are source of their economic stability and jobs. Those prisons across America would have to close down. Private prison companies now listed on the New York Stock Exchange and doing quite well in a time of economic recession. Those private prison companies would be forced into bankruptcy, would go belly up. This system of mass incarceration has become so deeply rooted, so entrenched in our social, political, and economic structure in a very short time, just since Dr. King's death, that it's not going to just fade away without some kind of major shift in our public consciousness, a true awakening among all of us. Now, I know, thank you. Now, I know there are many who say there is really no hope of ending mass incarceration in America. Just as many were resigned to Jim Crow in the South and would say, yes, that's a shame, it's a shame, but that's just the way that it is. I find that many view the millions cycling in and out of our prisons and jails as just an unfortunate but inalterable fact of American life. Well, I know that Dr. King would not have been so resigned. So I believe that if we are truly to honor Dr. King, if we are ever to catch up to King, we must be willing to continue his work. We must be willing to go back and pick up where he left off and rededicate ourselves to that revolution of values he dreamed of and do the hard work of movement building on behalf of poor people of all colors. I hope we will commit ourselves. I hope that we will commit ourselves to building a human rights movement. In 1968, Dr. King told advocates that the time had come to transition from a civil rights movement to a human rights movement. Meaningful equality could not be achieved through civil rights alone, he said, without basic human rights. The right to work, the right to housing, the right to quality education. Without basic human rights, he said, civil rights are an empty promise. So in honor of Dr. King and all those who labored to end the old Jim Crow, I hope we will build a human rights movement to end mass incarceration, a movement for education, not incarceration, a movement for jobs, not jails, a movement that will end all forms of discrimination against those released from prison, discrimination that denies them basic human rights to work, to shelter, and to food. Now, what must we do to build, to contribute to this movement? What is the role of lawyers, the guardians of liberty, in this era of mass incarceration? Well, first, I believe we have got to be willing to tell the truth, the whole truth. We've got to be willing to exercise some courage in this time and tell the truth about what has occurred. Back during the old Jim Crow, there was no denying the existence of a caste-like system. There were signs, whites-only signs. Today, this system of mass incarceration is out of sight and out of mind. If you are not directly impacted by it, you can easily go your whole life having no idea what is really going on as people cycle in and out of prison and back to their ghettoized communities and back to prisons again. So we have got to be willing, as lawyers, as legal advocates, as members of the legal profession, as guardians of liberty and justice, to be able to speak up, speak out with courage, and to tell the truth about this system of mass incarceration and the harm that it has done. But of course, just a lot of talk isn't going to be enough. We're going to have to be willing to get to work. And that means building and supporting an underground railroad for people released from prison, people who are trying to make a genuine break for freedom and need help finding food and shelter and work. We've got to be willing to open not only our places of work and our places of worship, but also our hearts and our minds to people returning home from prison, people who want a genuine chance at true freedom. But of course, just building an underground railroad itself is not going to be enough either. Just as in the days of slavery, it wasn't enough to help a few to freedom, to represent people one by one, to provide shelter for a few one by one. You had to be willing to work for abolition of slavery. Well, today, I believe that we, especially those in the legal profession, have got to be willing to stand up, speak out, and work for the abolition of this system of mass incarceration as a whole. We do. We do. And that means ending the war on drugs once and for all. We have to shift to a public health model for dealing with drug addiction and drug abuse, and to stop spending billions of dollars warehousing people in prisons and jails and saddling them with records that will follow them for the rest of their lives. And we've got to commit ourselves to ending all these forms of legal discrimination against people released from prison. Discrimination that denies them basic human rights to work and to shelter, to education and to food. And last but not least, we have got to shift from a purely punitive approach to dealing with violence and violent crime in our communities to a more rehabilitative and restorative approach, one that takes seriously the interests of the victim, the offender, and the community as a whole. We have got a lot of work to do. We do. And if it seems like too much, if it seems like it can't possibly all be done, keep in mind that all of the rules, laws, policies, and practices that constitute the basic architecture of this new caste system, they all rest upon one core belief. And it is the same belief that sustained Jim Crow. It is the belief that some of us are not worthy of genuine care, compassion, or concern. And when we effectively challenge that core belief, this whole system will begin to fall like dominoes. A multiracial, multi-ethnic human rights movement must be born, one that takes seriously the dignity and humanity of all people. But before this movement can truly get underway, a great awakening is required. We have got to awaken from this colorblind slumber that we've been in to the realities of race in America. And we've got to be willing to embrace those labeled criminals. Not necessarily their behavior, but them, their humanness. For it has been the refusal and failure to recognize the dignity and humanity of all people that has been the sturdy foundation for every caste system that has ever existed in the United States or anywhere else in the world. It's our task, I firmly believe, to end not just mass incarceration, not just the war on drugs, but to end this history and cycle of caste in America. Thank you so much for having me here today. Thank you.
I feel like I just took my seatbelt off. Thank you, Professor Alexander, and even though the beacon of light failed us, please know that you serve as the beacon of light for the hope and opportunity to make profound changes in our system. Dr. King served as the conscience of America on so many different topics and subjects throughout his entire life. And please know that you are part of the future and can serve as our conscience of what we can do and the changes that we can make in our judicial system. So on behalf of the city of Seattle, on behalf of King County, and on behalf of the state of Washington, it's been a deep honor and privilege to have you in our city. Thank you. And I've purchased more of Professor Alexander's books and given them away as gifts so many times that she probably saw a spike in sales at different times That's when I was out buying presents. But setting that aside, she's going to spend a little bit of time with us this afternoon signing her book. So if you have the good fortune of having one of your books, her books with you, you'll have the chance to do that. And I'd like to close with thanking you for being here and with my co-chair, Karen Murray, to come back and make one more last request of you. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Professor Alexander. Please, before you leave, please contribute to the King County Bar Foundation Minority Law Scholarship Fund. Let individual students have their opportunity to make their dreams come true. Thank you all for coming. Thank you.